turn. We're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 3 today. You're welcome to go ahead and be turning there if you would like. It'll also be up on the screen as well. Now, you may not know this about me, but I have quite an extensive background in ballet. I know that may be a surprise to some of you. Not me personally, obviously, but my daughters took ballet for a lot of years, especially my oldest daughter, which she still teaches ballet today. And so through the years, I've been to the recitals, and I've learned some of the terms like a plie and pirouette and I did jeté. I know what it means to be on point and to be on bar, and that's pretty much my extent. But one thing I found fascinating, and I remember Katie Ray telling me this years ago, and it was regarding ballet. She told me that if someone who is opposite of you falls, that you are actually supposed to fall as well. Now, I'm thinking if I'm in a recital and somebody falls, that's kind of on them, right? I'm probably not going to go down on my own. But I said, why would you do that? She said, well, it's kind of etiquette, and then she also said, well, it's because you're willing to do that because you're there for your team, and it's not about you. And so if you're at a ballet and you see that happens now that you know, but it got me thinking about this chapter in Nehemiah that we're going to look at today. And we've been studying over these past few weeks this person that God used to make a difference in the life of those in Jerusalem and beyond. Nehemiah worked to rebuild a wall. And but we're going to see that while God used him to be the leader, to be the architect of this incredible project, that it takes all different kinds of people to get the work done. And much like you'll see in a ballet, we're going to see the importance of teamwork today. Now, if you were to look at Nehemiah chapter 3, and you were maybe just to sort of look at that and kind of skim over it, you'll notice a bunch of names. In fact, I did the research for you so that you don't have to do so, but there's 38 individual names listed in this chapter. And along with their names, you'll see the job that they set out to do. One commentator referred to this as a colorless memorandum of assignments. But it's not just a list of names or assignments. No one would look at a war memorial and say, well, that's just a list. No, those names are important to our country. They represent freedom and courage and sacrifice. And in a similar way, these names in Nehemiah chapter 3 represent men and women who worked in spite of opposition, in spite of danger, to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Now, if you've not been with us maybe over these past couple weeks, let me just really, really quickly just give a summary to where we are at. After years and years of disobedience, after years of warning, God repeatedly said, turn back to me, turn from your idolatry, or you're going to go into exile, and that's exactly what happened. In 586 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians captured the Jews. Jerusalem was destroyed, the walls torn down, the temple burned, the city just in ruins. And the Jewish people were exiled. They were deported away, and again, the city left in ruins. But God hadn't forsaken his people. Babylon, who had overtaken the Jews, was a little bit later on overtaken by the Persians. And King Cyrus God would move into King Cyrus to make a decree to let some of the Jews return back to and other exiles return back to their homes. And this happened really in 3 different stages over a period of about 100 years. But even though they've been going back little by little, the city is still absolutely in ruins. But Nehemiah, he is not in Jerusalem. He's not in the city. He's actually at the palace with the king. He is serving as the cupbearer. But God burdened his heart. God, he asked about a question about the city, and he was broken, and God burdened his heart, and he set out to rebuild the walls. He petitioned the king. The king granted him permission to go back to the city and begin the project. And that's where we pick up today. And now today we're going to look at all these workers that he has enlisted for this construction assignment. And what's going to be really practical for us is the parallel that we see today as the church. And, of course, the importance of everyone serving together and how important teamwork is. But let me just tell you this. We're going to see something more important than even that, okay? This is bigger than working on walls. This is bigger than even for us, working together as a church. We're going to see today from Nehemiah that they weren't just working on walls, they were worshiping God. And the same is true for us. We don't serve just to serve or do just to do or volunteer just to volunteer because it's expected or we have to. Why do we work? We work out of worship. In fact, let me just get everybody to say that. Make sure we're all awake. Say this with me. My work is out of worship. My work is out of worship, right? And so let me just say up front, this is going to be the point I'm hoping to drive home today. Next time you change that diaper in the nursery. Next time you teach a kid's class. Next time you prepare a meal for someone who is sick. The next time you fold the bulletins. The next time you serve your neighbor. You volunteer at school. You clean up after a meal. Remember, your work is out of worship for your God. And that's why we work. That's why we serve. It's all out of worship. I'm going to give you 6 principles this morning from this chapter as it relates to working together. The first one is just simply this. Leaders must set the example. Leaders must set the example. Verse 1. Now, I'm not going to read all this whole chapter. We're going to just got to be ready to skip around just a little bit. Chapter 3, verse 1. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuild the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Hananel. Now, the first gate that they worked on was the sheep gate. The sheep gate was closest to the temple, and it was closest to the temple because this was the gate there where sheep were entered into to be sacrificed in worship. And so as these sheep went in through that gate, guess what? They didn't return. Of course, what's interesting about this is what Jesus would later identify himself as, right? Jesus would later identify himself as the gate for the sheep. John 10 says it like this. Therefore, Jesus said, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. Now, this is the gospel message, right? We're getting it right up front. Salvation is found through Jesus alone. There is no other gate to enter in through. Amen? Now, people will make this claim often that all religions lead to God. Like all paths lead to God. I have even recently heard, the Pope even make that claim, right? Even though that's not the stance of the Catholic Church. But there is only one gate by which we can enter. It's through that gate. It's through Jesus. But did you notice who it was that took the initiative to rebuild this first gate that is mentioned? It was the priest. Now, what they could have said, well, that's not our job, right? Our job is to, to teach or to preach, to work in the temple. I don't have any experience in concrete. There's really not. But what they do, they picked up a block just like everybody else. Leaders always set the pace regardless of the project. Now, if you're a leader in this church, and of course leaders come in all different forms, don't they? But let me specifically talk to our elders and our deacons for just a moment. Okay? You and I must set the example, right? I must set the example. You must set the example. If we don't do a good job leading, why would we expect anybody to follow? Right? We have to lead well. And listen, you know where it starts? It starts in your home. You have to lead well in your home. Right? You can't lead well in the church if you're not leading well at home. It begins there. So first, leaders, and again, that's for everybody, right? But leaders set the example. That's what the priests are doing. Secondly, notice God uses different kinds of people. Drop down to verse 8. Uzziel, son of Herahiah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the next section. And Hananiah, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. They restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Drop down to verse 17. Next to him, the repairs were made by the Levites under Rehum, son of Bani. And then verse 32, drop down. I know I told you we're going to be bouncing around just a little bit this morning. And between the room above the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and merchants made repairs. You see what's happening here? God is using all these different people with all these different skill sets, with all these different talents to do the work. You've got priests and Levites and goldsmiths and perfume makers and merchants, right? The Lord didn't need 1,000 construction workers. He didn't need 1,000 carpenters. He didn't need 1,000 masons. He just needed ordinary people like you and me to get the job done. And so what Nehemiah did, if you read maybe this ahead of time, you notice that Nehemiah, he takes the people and he doesn't just say, okay, this is a vast project, just pick some place and just start. No, instead, he puts them working close to their homes. And of course, there's a little more incentive in that. I mean, the walls protected your house. You have a little bit more pride about where you live. With that area being done, it would be like if you and I set out to, maybe we were going to say, you know what, we're going to clean up 25 miles of trash off the road. And instead of, if I'm the leader and said, just go pick a place, we said, no, you're going to stay within a half a mile within your home. You would be a little bit more motivated, right? Be a little bit more motivated. It reflects you, and there's a little bit more pride in that. And that's exactly what was happening here. Nehemiah puts them to work close to their homes. And 13 times, though, in this chapter, we see a diverse group of people working on their section. In other words, no one person could do all the work. And of course, isn't that true in the church? Listen, this is why we encourage you to serve no matter what your background is, no matter what your talents are. Priest, Levite, merchant, goldsmith, it doesn't matter. Blue-collar worker, white-collar, up-front leadership, behind the scenes, working with kids. Do not put me with kids. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? Every section needs something to be done inside the walls and outside the walls. And listen, you don't need an invitation. Just pick up a brick. Just pick up a brick. And just pick a spot. Now, I don't want you to do this right now, okay? So you're going to be tempted, big time tempted, okay? Listen, Satan, okay, I won't say it, but you're going to be tempted. So in your bulletin, there's a little section, there's a little insert that we put. And so what we want to do today is that we've included this to help you find areas to serve. We want you to fill that form out and get it back to us as soon as you can. In fact, if you're leaving after this, take a few moments, not now, take a few moments after we're done, and you can fill that out, and you can just leave it out there on the table. Or if you're going to one of our small groups or Sunday school, take the first 5 minutes and fill that out, and then give it to your leader, your teacher, and they will get it back to us, okay? But just do that. And what will happen is you'll get a call, and we'll get you plugged in. If you don't get a call, you call me, okay? And I'll make sure that you get to your section of the wall. We need you, okay? We need you. God uses all different kinds of people. Every single one of us have unique talents and skills. God needs each of us. That's the second principle. The third principle is this: some will not work. Some will not work. In chapter 3, we see the vast majority of the people in Jerusalem getting dirty and doing the work that needs to get done. But even in the best circumstances, sometimes some people still will not work. Verse 5. The next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. Now, the city of Tekoa was about 11 miles away from Jerusalem, and their nobles apparently thought that they were too important to do manual labor. Right? You've probably met some folks like that, maybe. I'm sure that you have, right? This sense of entitlement. I'm too good to get my hands dirty. I'm too good to do that. But doesn't that run in exact opposition with what Jesus taught? I mean, Jesus said those who are going to be the greatest, It's not that they're going to sit back and let other people do all the work. No, they're going to serve. They're going to be the very least. That phrase where it says they wouldn't put their shoulders to the work suggests, I think, pride is a big part of that. But Nehemiah, he's using sort of this agricultural term, and it's describing this stiff-necked ox who refused to be yoked. Jeremiah, an earlier prophet, he wrote a stinging rebuke about those who refuse to work for the Lord. In Jeremiah 48:10, he said, "A curse on anyone who is lax in doing the Lord's work." Now, if that doesn't motivate you a little bit, right? I'm not sure what will. I don't think anybody's, we don't want to be under some kind of curse. Now, there are some people that just genuinely don't care. But I think more often than not, and especially in the church, it's not that people won't work. It's just we don't know what to do. Like, what am I supposed to do? And so that's why, again, we're giving you this opportunity to sign up. And I'll say this, one of the best ways to learn sometimes what to do is by joining a Sunday school class or a small group and fellowshipping with other believers, and really, you see sort of what they're doing and you can kind of jump in. I mean, that's a great way to do it. That's the third principle. Some will not work. The fourth principle is this: some do more work than others. Some do more than others, right? It's not too hard to figure out. Remember those men from Tekoa I just mentioned in verse 5? We read that they finished their section of the wall, even though their nobles wouldn't help out. But then look what it says in verse 27. I think this is great. It says, next to them, the men of Tekoa repaired another section from the great projecting tower to the wall of Ophel. Their leaders set a terrible example, but they didn't let it stop them. They finished their section and kept on going. There's another guy named Meshullam, and then another named Meremoth. They also repaired additional sections as well. Now, this is probably true for all of us, but it's easy to sort of fold our hands and relax when we set out and we do a job, or we look around and we're really not sure what to do. And of course, there's time to rest. Of course, listen, for some of you, the most spiritual thing you can do is you need some rest. Go home and take a nap today, okay? It's fine. That's good for you, right? But the men of Tekoa, they knew like there was still work to be done. And so they pressed on. They kept going. And of course, in the church, we see this as well. Some naturally do more than others. Sometimes it's because their schedule allows them to do so. Sometimes it's just because that's what they choose to do. In fact, the old adage was, and see if you think this is probably true, the old adage always was is that 20% did 80% of the work. Right? You've probably heard that, and that's probably true almost in any organization. But I think we do better than that. But wouldn't it be better if we had 80% doing 100% of the work? Or 100% doing all the work, right? Some work more than others. That was one of these principles we see. Fifth, we see some work with passion. Some work with passion. This entire chapter, there's one guy mentioned who worked zealously. Looking down in verse 20. Next to him, Baruch, son of Zabbai, zealously repaired another section. That Hebrew word there for zealously means to burn or to glow, suggesting that Baruch burned with a lot of energy. He wasn't just serving, he was on fire, right? He was on fire for the Lord. Now, I think this description is somewhat astonishing, because if you go over to chapter 4 and verse 6, it said that the people worked with all their heart. Right? I mean, so this wasn't a shot at the other people. They were working with all their heart, but when everybody was working hard in a crowd of committed workers, Baruch stood out among the rest. We need people like that, don't we, in the church? People who will say, you know what, I don't care what anybody else is doing. I'm going to work. I'm going to do the very best that I can, and I'm going to do it for the Lord. Now, the good news is, we have some Baruchs right here at First Christian Church. I won't call out any names because I'm going to miss them. And we've had Baruch, some in the past. They've gone on to be with the Lord, but they give and give and give, and have been doing so. And for me, like, it makes serving here for me, like, that much more joyful. The folks are just, hey, I'm willing to serve. I'll do whatever. You just point me in the right direction. and we're going to accomplish that mission. They serve, and the only way to explain that is that they're serving because the Lord is their passion. Now, let me just say one word of caution, okay, as it pertains to serving. When you serve, though, you have to take a look at your heart to make sure that the reasons you are serving are pure. You may think, well, preacher, you're just supposed to serve. No, listen. There are wrong motives when it comes to serving. You can serve because you want control. You can serve because you want recognition. You can serve because, other people might see me and they may think good things of me. Listen, but when you're serving for any of those reasons, do you know what that is? It's actually dishonoring the Lord because you're not serving Him, you're serving yourself. Right? So you have to always take a look. What's my motive? Are my motives good? Am I truly trying to serve the Lord in this? But not all the work is fun, is it? Look at all these, we see all these different gates listed in chapter 3 to be repaired. And of course, you go to Jerusalem today, you can still see these. You can go, and you don't have to go. You can just look them up online. But look at verse 13. It says, the valley gate was repaired by Hanan and the residents of Zanoah. They rebuilt it and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. They also repaired 500 yards of the wall as far as the dung gate. Can we take some volunteers for the dung gate today, right? I mean, when they said, who's got the dung gate, right? Then nobody's like, somebody else can take that one, right? Sometimes the work isn't fun. Oftentimes, it's not very glamorous. Sometimes there's stuff that nobody wants to do. But if you keep reading, the dung gate gets repaired and doesn't get repaired by, hey, we'll just hire this one out. It doesn't get repaired by somebody's servant. It gets repaired by a district ruler. This is what Jesus had in mind, right? You're going to serve, you're going to be like the least of these. Some work with passion even though the job isn't glamorous. And then sixth, some work as families. Some work as families. Verse 12. Shalem, son of Haelesh, ruler of a half-district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. Now, as I mentioned, the general principle was to work sort of in your neighborhood, your area. But we see Shalem here. He jumped into his work with his family. And, of course, the same is true in our lives and in our families, right? Church, listen, let me just remind you, you've heard me say this before, but your number one ministry must be to your family. Don't delegate that responsibility to anyone else, including programs at a church. At some point in our history, I think we started looking at the church much as in the same way as we do public school, right? Most parents have decided that I'm going to delegate my education of my kids to the state, and so we send them to school and we let qualified teachers instruct them. And that's okay, obviously up to a point, but their education is still your responsibility. I mean, you have to follow up with progress. You have to help them with homework. Sometimes you have to make them study. Oftentimes you have to make them study, right? And sometimes you have to teach them what they're missing out in school. They can't just get everything. But I think what's happened is that sometimes, somehow, at some point, parents have sort of developed the same mindset about the church. I'm going to delegate their spiritual upbringing I'm going to delegate that to the church for the life of my child. And so we send them and we hope they get what they need. But the problem is twofold. Number one, we just barely get them, right? I mean, just a couple hours a week at the most, right? And so that makes it really, really difficult. But secondly, ultimately, you have to understand that it's your responsibility. You can't delegate that to somebody else. I know you don't feel like this, especially if your kids are a little bit older, but parents, believe me, you are the biggest influence of your child's life. It's not me. It's not any of us here, right? You are their biggest influence. So you lead. You set the example. You give them an example that they can follow. Now, what we want to do, obviously, as a church is to partner and to be a resource with parents and to be faithful with your kids while we have them. So we invest our money and time and youth ministry. But we want you to play the biggest role there, right? Because you are the biggest role in their discipleship process. Do you know what, parents? Let me just say one more thing about this. Do you realize how important serving with your children, how important that really is? I remember a study. This has been several years ago now, but it was an in-depth study, and it followed families for over a 10-year period. And the what they were trying to figure out is why sometimes faith gets passed and sometimes it doesn't, right? Because we have all these kids who graduate high school and then they walk away from the church. And so the study's like, well, why is this happening? And one of the most important components, parents, that the reason that faith gets passed down from generation to the next generation was by serving alongside one another with a family. When your kids serve with you, as you serve together, it makes a huge difference in what's going to happen in their future. Shalem, just like him, I mean, you can look for opportunities to serve together. Church, home, neighborhood, whatever it may be, looking for ways to love God and to love people. And you know what? When the church does that, lives are changed, aren't they? I mean, can you imagine, church, how impactful we would be if everyone decided, you know what, this is worth getting my hands dirty. This is worth picking up a brick. This is worth doing whatever I can to rebuild what sin has destroyed. And that's what we do. That's the call. That's the Great Commission. Fred Craddock, maybe that's a name that some of you are familiar with, maybe not. He was last century one of the greatest preachers really in the past century. Just a legend in many ways. And several years ago, CNN did an article on Craddock, and it was entitled, "A Preaching Genius Faces His Toughest Convert." And the story was about Craddock's father. Fred Craddock Sr. Wasn't a Christian. He was often skeptical of faith, critical of the church. Preachers who lived next to him, close to him, they would often reach out and try to visit. But he would always say things like, you know what, they just want another name in their book. They're just looking for another check in the offering plate. He was just always skeptical. Well, as his father grew older, he began to have more serious health problems. And one day, Fred's mother called him and he said, "Hey, you need to go check on your father. He may not live much longer." And so Craddock went to see his father. He was actually in the VA hospital in Memphis. He had wasted away to 75 pounds. Radiation treatments had destroyed him. Couldn't eat, couldn't speak. Well, Craddock had learned, though, that even though his dad wasn't part of a church, a local church had faithfully visited him. People came to visit him. They came to pray with him. People from the church brought meals to their home, sent out cards and flowers, and slowly the heart of his father had softened. One day, Fred was sitting with his father in a hospital. And his father reached over and he picked up a Kleenex box and next to his bed, and he grabbed a pen and he grabbed a pen and he jotted something down. Fred leaned in to see what he had written down, and he had written a quote. The quote was from Shakespeare's Hamlet, and the quote simply said this: "In this harsh world, draw your breath in pain to tell my story." And Fred said, "What's your story, Daddy? What's your story?" And his eyes filled with tears, and he wrote 3 brutally honest words: "I was wrong. I was wrong." See, that's the power of working together. That's the power of the church that Jesus died for. Church, listen, you have been faithful for so many years. You have served and you've done great works in the past. I'm thankful for that, but guess what? We got a lot of work ahead. Why? It's unfinished. It's unfinished. We're working until the Lord returns, and we're going to serve Him until the Lord returns. But do you see what I'm trying to drive at today? That this is bigger than a construction project. This is bigger than ministry teams. This is bigger than volunteers. This is bigger than just us trying to get you to do something. No. This isn't about walls. This is about worship. Your work is your worship. See, in Nehemiah's day, those walls, they represented sin. They were broken down because the people had rebelled against God. Over and over again, God warned them and said, look, this is going to happen. You have to repent. You have to turn back from your idolatry. You have to return to me. And yet they refused. And God doesn't mince his words. Like what he says is going to happen, it's going to happen. And those walls represented, they represented sin. They were broken down because they had rebelled against God. And this construction project, though, it was a shadow of what Jesus would ultimately fulfill. It was a shadow of what Jesus had ultimately come to do. Everything that sin had marred and destroyed was being made new. See, Nehemiah, he repaired broken walls. Jesus repaired a broken relationship. He wasn't a gate for the sheep. He was the gate. The sheep that would enter through Jerusalem's gate would provide temporary forgiveness and for sin. But the problem is that people had to come back over and over and over, and the priests had to continue to offer sacrifice after sacrifice. Why? Because sin continued to be a problem. But Jesus came once and for all. And after his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension, he sat down next to the Father. Why? Because his work was completed. And when we understand that, when we understand what Christ has done for us, what God, like when we get that, like we can work for joy. We can serve and not grow weary. We can work with true motives, and we can celebrate, always thinking about the gospel and what Christ has done. And that's why we work. Your work's worship. And God is worthy of our worship in everything. We are called our life to be a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Maybe today you're here, and maybe you've never even placed your faith and trust in Jesus. Maybe for the very, you've just never done that, right? Maybe you just never knew what God has done for you. Maybe there's some other reason you just kind of been pushing that off. I don't know, but my question for you today, just simply, whether you've made that good confession long years ago, or maybe you've never done that at all. Like, do you know the Good Shepherd? Do you know the gate for the sheep? Has he changed your life? Let's pray together. Father God, we do come, Lord, confessing that we come way short. Lord, even our best, where we're working, where we're serving, even in our best, we come up short because every single one of us, if truth be told, our motives aren't always good. But that's why you sent your Son. That's why Jesus came, because he did and accomplished what we could not accomplish. He did the work that we could not do. And when he was finished, that's exactly what he said. It is finished. And so, Lord, today we come trusting the work of Jesus. God, if there's any here today who's maybe in this room or listening or watching online, God, my prayer that maybe even today as they hear my words, that they would cry out to you, to trust you, and begin that relationship of walking with you faithfully. God, you've been so good to us. You deserve our all. God, we give you thanks. We give you praise. We ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Let's be standing and we'll sing a song of worship, commitment, prayer, whatever, if you have a decision today, we welcome you. You're welcome to come up. Again, you're welcome to come forward for prayer, whatever it may be. Let's be reminded where our hope is today.